The crunch of broken concrete under my boots still echoes through my bones. I stood in the morning haze where my beautiful stamped driveway used to be, now reduced to jagged rubble and diesel-soaked soil. Orange cones mocked me from my own front, yard-like warning flags I never got to raise. But what really hit me was the silence. My father, 78 years old, sat silently in the passenger seat, staring at the empty patch where his wheelchair ramp used to be. No words, just the quiet weight of betrayal. That ramp had been his independence, gone, bulldozed overnight. No warning, no decency. Just the sound of diesel engines and control gone mad. They didn't just destroy my property. They billed me for it. $15,000. Emergency road improvement, they called it. I call it theft. What would you do if someone demolished your home and handed you the bill? Because what I did, well, it's a trap they'll never forget. My name is Marcus Dalton. I'm a retired firefighter, spent decades running into burning buildings while everyone else ran out. 8 years ago, I thought I'd found peace in Willowbrook Estates, just outside Phoenix. The house? Beautiful. The neighborhood? Quiet. The driveway? 18 feet wide. Extra room for lumber deliveries to my home woodworking shop. Morning coffee on the porch. Cardinals chirping in the mesquite trees. It felt like I'd finally earned this peace. But 6 months ago, everything changed. My father moved in after his stroke. Decorated Vietnam vet, wheelchair bound. I converted the garage into a small apartment, built him a custom ramp with my own hands. The first time he rolled down that ramp and smiled, that was the proudest moment I'd had since retirement. That's when she showed up. Brenda Kowalski. If a tax audit had a face, it would be hers. A 61-year-old clipboard-wielding tyrant from Minnesota with bleach blonde hair, khaki capris, and the soul of a parking ticket. She was the newly self-appointed HOA president, elected by apathy and fueled by power. Every morning at 6 a.m., she'd stalk the streets with her tape measure like a suburban warden inspecting for flaws in her kingdom, and she found mine, my 18-foot driveway. Non-conforming. Egregious violation of community aesthetic standards. Her words, not mine, said with the same tone people reserve for crime scenes and unpaid taxes, but here's the kicker. My driveway had been built 3 years before the HOA ever existed. I had the surveyor's report to prove it. Didn't matter. She declared, grandfathering doesn't apply to egregious violations. That's when the fines started. Trash cans visible from the street. They were behind a 6-foot fence. Unapproved bird feeder, disturbing the aesthetic harmony, workshop deliveries at 2 p.m., violating quiet hours, $50, 75, 100, one after the next, stacking like smoke from a slow-burning fire meant to choke you out. But the real firestorm came when Dad and I went camping up in Sedona for the weekend. His first trip out since the stroke. We returned Sunday night to find our driveway gone. Not cracked, not damaged. Gone. 18 feet of beautiful concrete. Obliterated. A bulldozer sat in the front yard like a sleeping beast. Hydraulic fluid soaked into my flower beds. The whole scene looked like a war zone, and standing in the middle of it, Brenda, wearing a hard hat like she was a damn general, clipboard in hand, smile sharp enough to draw blood. Emergency fire access, she announced, like I should thank her. Your driveway was blocking potential emergency vehicle turnaround. We acted under our emergency powers clause. It didn't feel like a clause. It felt like a wrecking ball, and my father, my proud, quiet father, he just stared at where his ramp used to be. No words, just pain. That's when I realized. This wasn't about safety. This was about power. Control. 1. Woman's need to dominate an entire neighborhood, and anyone who dared to stand up. But here's what Brenda didn't understand about firefighters. We don't run from fire. We run toward it. and she had just lit the biggest one of her miserable little life. I marched straight to her house, rage burning hotter than a warehouse blaze. Through the front window, I saw her hosting an emergency HOA board meeting, 3 retirees nodding like bobbleheads. I rang the doorbell. She answered like she didn't know what she'd done. "Marcus," she chirped. "We were just discussing your situation." I didn't wait for an invitation. "You mean the destruction of my private property?" I stepped inside. The smell of instant coffee and fake vanilla air freshener tried to cover the stench of corruption. She slid a document across the table. Emergency Ordinance 47B, passed 3 days ago, under the imminent threat clause. Fancy letterhead, legal-sounding nonsense, and then the bill, $4,200, to destroy my driveway. She even threatened to file a lien if I didn't pay within 30 days. I almost laughed, but then she slipped up. The contractor invoice, .Eagle Construction LLC. I'd seen that name before. Somewhere. Then I noticed the date. The work order was signed a week before the ordinance passed. This wasn't an emergency. This was premeditated destruction, and Brenda? She had just given me the first thread, and I was going to pull until the whole thing unraveled. Everyone saw the busted-up driveway and the orange cones. What they didn't see was the trap. The one I'd been building quietly, piece by piece, ever since they tore my property apart like it meant nothing. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the driveway. It was about watching my wheelchair-bound father sit motionless in the passenger seat, staring at the destroyed ramp I'd built with my own hands. That was the moment I knew I couldn't just fight back. I had to end it. The HOA took my private driveway to build a so-called emergency road, and now they were about to walk straight into the fire they started. My name is Marcus Dalton, and 8 years ago I thought I'd found peace. A retired firefighter, a small woodworking business, a quiet neighborhood in Willowbrook Estates just outside Phoenix. The driveway was wider than standard, 18 feet, and perfect for lumber deliveries. I loved that detail. Every morning I'd sit on my porch with coffee in hand, listening to birds in the trees and breathing in the mulch from my flower beds. Life was simple, until Brenda Kowalski and her HOA goons decided my driveway violated community aesthetics. That's when the citations began. First about the width, then bird feeders, delivery noise, even trash cans behind a fence. Brenda wasn't enforcing rules. She was testing how far she could push me. They thought they broke me when they destroyed my driveway while I was camping with Dad. We came home to bulldozed concrete. A bill for $15,000, and Brenda, smiling in a hard hat like she'd won the next morning, started with sawdust in my hair and a hammer in my hand. But not for woodworking. Not anymore. I wasn't building a bench. I was building payback and revenge. Like any good project, needed a blueprint. What they didn't know was that I kept everything. Emails, letters, notices, timestamps. Firefighters are trained to document everything. Scene logs, debriefs, evidence. I went straight to the pile of HOA mail I'd saved and found the exact citation that said my driveway posed a community threat, dated just 10 days before demolition. That was the first red flag, because the demolition work order? Signed a week before that. Brenda didn't just abuse power, she forged the path for it, and I knew the one person who could help me blow the lid off. Gregory Peters. HOA board secretary, 73, former city planner, nervous as a chipmunk at a dog park. He never liked Brenda's bulldozing style, literally or figuratively. I saw him once panic when a neighbor painted their mailbox slightly off-white. A rules guy, through and through, but more than anything, he feared lawsuits. I invited him over for coffee. His eyes darted from the destroyed driveway to my father's now useless ramp. I had no idea, he whispered. You signed off on it. I didn't know what I was signing. So I showed him the work order, The date, the ordinance, the forged emergency clause. His face went white, then pink, then a sweaty kind of red. "I need to show you something," he said. Back. At his home, he opened a file drawer. Thin, metallic, squeaky, like something out of a bad thriller. Inside, a sealed envelope marked HOA, Bylaws, Emergency Amendments. Inside that envelope were printed minutes from a meeting that never officially happened. Brenda had typed them herself, faked votes, invented attendance. My name was on it. So was Greg's. So were the names of 2 residents I knew for a fact were on a cruise the day it supposedly occurred. Brenda had gone full dictator. Now I had proof. But documentation alone wasn't enough. You don't just expose a tyrant with paperwork. You bury them with consequences. So I went hunting for the one thing that would turn the tide. Conflict of Interest, Eagle Construction, LLC. That name, it bugged me. Too familiar. I dug through my old client logs from years ago. Bingo. A shed I'd built for a guy named Ron Keller, a concrete subcontractor. Guess who now owned Eagle Construction? Ron. And guess who he was married to? Brenda Kowalski's sister. There it was, the snake eating its own tail. I made 3 calls, 1 to a real estate attorney, 1 to the city zoning board, and 1 to KPHX Channel 5. If they wanted to play politics, I'd bring the firestorm they couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, I started rebuilding, but not the driveway. I rebuilt the ramp. By hand. Every plank. Every bolt. Took me 3 days. When my father rolled down it again, just once, and nodded at me, I felt something inside me click. Brenda had broken a part of me. But what she didn't count on was that the rest of me rebuilt stronger. 30 days passed. They tried to file a lien, but the city stepped in first. Turns out, the HOA never filed for actual municipal emergency permissions. The so-called road was not only illegal, it violated local easement regulations. And Eagle Construction, already under investigation for overbilling contracts in 3 counties. Then the camera crews came. Local news ran the story under the headline, "Veterans Home Destroyed by Rogue HOA President." I didn't even have to raise my voice. Brenda was forced to resign. The board was dissolved, the HOA's finances frozen. But that wasn't the trap. The trap came after. I bought the empty lot next to mine. Quiet auction. Brenda didn't notice. She had plans to develop it into a new HOA clubhouse. I poured concrete, just enough to form a short road, wide enough to look official. Then I installed a gate, solar-powered. No access, and a sign. Private. Property. No through road. Violators will be billed now. Every time someone tries to cut through to reach Brenda's old street, they hit a dead end. And I smile, because dignity doesn't always look like pride. Sometimes it looks like consequences. Sometimes it looks like a trap they'll never forget. They called it an informal meeting, but it felt like a firing squad without the bullets. 5 HOA board members sitting in folding chairs on Brenda's patio, sipping iced tea like they weren't in the middle of a neighborhood scandal. Brenda sat at the head of the table with that same smirk she wore the day they tore up my driveway, as if she'd already won again. "So, Marcus," she said, lacing her fingers under her chin like a politician during a press briefing, "we've been informed that you've made certain accusations. Do you have proof?" I looked at each of them, and then slid the folder across the table. Emails, backdated documents, the contractor connection, photos, voice recordings, copies of Greg's handwritten confession. It was all there. Brenda's smirk tightened like a noose. One of the board members, a retired pharmacist named Louise, picked up a sheet and squinted at it. "You're saying Brenda signed a contract for demolition work before the board voted?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The papers spoke louder than I ever could. Greg sat at the far end, pale and sweating. He hadn't said a word since we arrived. Brenda's eyes darted to him like a predator scanning a weak packmate. "Greg!" she hissed. He stood up too quickly, knocking over his iced tea. I think we should adjourn this discussion," he stammered. But it was too late. I leaned in. "You didn't just break HOA rules, Brenda. You broke the law." She stood up slowly, trying to hold her posture like some Roman empress about to deliver a decree. "This is slander!" she snapped. "None of this will hold up in court." I didn't say a word, just pulled out my phone and hit play. Her voice came through clearly, a phone call I'd recorded a week earlier when I'd baited her into talking about the driveway. "Well, of course we had to move quickly," she said on the recording. "If we waited for another vote, they'd try to stop it. That driveway was an eyesore." Brenda froze. So did the others. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. Gleeful, smug, convinced of her untouchability. And for the first time since she rolled into Willowbrook with her measuring tape and fake smile, she looked scared. 2 hours later, 3 of the 5 board members formally voted to suspend her from all HOA operations pending investigation. Greg resigned the next day. But this wasn't over. I didn't just want her gone. I wanted accountability. So I filed a civil suit. Destruction of private property. Emotional distress, fraud, illegal liens, collusion. My attorney, a soft-spoken woman named Clara Bishop, didn't blink once during our entire initial meeting. She simply listened, flipped through the evidence, and said, "We're going to bury her." And that's exactly what we set out to do. Meanwhile, back in the neighborhood, things started to shift. People who'd once avoided eye contact with me were now stopping me on my walks, offering support. One neighbor, Carla, a single mom who'd been fined for having a pink flamingo in her yard, came to my door in tears. She handed me a box. Inside were HOA documents, old ones, things Brenda had buried, records of fees improperly collected, photos of Brenda holding meetings without a quorum, even a logbook from a security guard who'd been fired after catching Brenda in a restricted community maintenance shed. I called Clara. Her smile was the first real one I'd seen in weeks. "This isn't just negligence," she said. "It's abuse of power." The media returned. This time, national outlets. Veterans ramp destroyed becomes federal case corruption in Willowbrook. HOA tyrant faces, court from firefighter to fighter. 1. Man versus a broken system. I became something I never wanted to be, a symbol. But deep down, I didn't care about fame. I cared about my father. Every night he wheeled himself out onto the porch, parked next to me, and watched the stars in silence. He didn't talk much since the stroke. But one night, after the news vans had left and the dust had settled just a bit, he said, "You were always brave, son. But this is different." That was all, and it meant everything. The lawsuit went to mediation first. Brenda showed up in a beige pantsuit, trying to look humble. Her attorney pushed for a settlement. We didn't budge. We had leverage. We had evidence. And we had time. Weeks passed. Then came the counterattack. She filed a defamation claim, said I'd slandered her name, tried to paint herself as a victim of media hysteria. She even gave a tearful interview on some B-tier talk show, claiming I had a personal vendetta. "Mr. Dalton is weaponizing his story," she said, blinking slowly like a malfunctioning animatronic. "He's manipulating public emotion to destroy my life." That was the moment the internet stepped in. Videos, DMs, screenshots. Former HOA presidents from other communities came forward with stories about Brenda's power-hungry behavior. One even shared a photo of Brenda trying to physically remove a holiday wreath from a neighbor's door in 2017. The court threw out her defamation suit. By now, the HOA's insurer had pulled out. Their legal fees were bankrupting them. And then came the final blow. Remember Eagle Construction? Turns out they'd also done work for Brenda's personal home, using HOA funds. I handed the invoices to the city. They handed them to the district attorney. Brenda was arrested on charges of embezzlement and fraud. They led her out of her house in handcuffs at 6:45 a.m., same time she used to walk the neighborhood with her tape measure. It felt poetic. But still, something in me wasn't settled. Even after the civil case settled in my favor, even after the HOA was dissolved and replaced by a voluntary neighborhood association, even after my father's ramp was rebuilt and my new driveway poured wider than before, I still felt hollow until I got the letter. It came in a plain envelope. No return address, just one line inside. Thank you for standing up when the rest of us were too afraid. There was no signature, but that one line hit me harder than any verdict, because it reminded me why I did it. Not for revenge, not for cameras, not even for the money. I did it because silence gives power to the wrong people, and I'm done being silent. So, now, every evening when I sit on my new front porch, coffee in hand, sawdust on my jeans, I look at the quiet cul-de-sac, and I see peace again, earned peace. And every so often, someone slows their car in front of my home, looks at the new sign posted proudly above my driveway, and smiles. Private driveway, not for public use. Not for bullies either. It's not just a message, it's a promise, and it's a trap they'll never forget. The mailbox was crooked again, just slightly, bent by wind or wear or maybe just time. But I stared at it for a long moment, wondering if anyone would ever come measure it again. For years, Brenda had fined people over details that small. Now, the silence where her voice used to echo across the neighborhood, that silence felt almost too big, almost lonely. The neighborhood had changed, not with bulldozers or bills this time, but with questions. People were finally asking things they hadn't dared ask before. Why do we pay fees? Who really controls the fines? How did one woman get the power to tear through someone's life like a storm without warning, and behind every whispered question was my name? Some saw me as the hero. Others saw me as the man who burned the house down just to kill the rat. But I wasn't interested in either version. I was just Marcus Dalton, and I wanted my porch back. The one with the coffee, the cardinals, the quiet morning breeze before the world came knocking. But peace, once shattered, never returns unchanged. A new family moved in 2 doors down. Young couple, toddler, first house. They stopped me on a Sunday. "You're the guy who stood up to the HOA," the man said, gripping my hand like I'd lifted a car off his child. His wife smiled shyly. "We were nervous about moving here, but then we saw the story. We knew it'd be different now." I nodded, not because I felt brave, but because I knew what they were really saying. They didn't want to be next, and I didn't want them to be either. That's when I knew. I couldn't just walk away. So I joined the new neighborhood association. Not as president, not as chairman, just as Marcus. The guy with the ramp, the guy with the receipts, the guy who knew what it looked like when no one spoke up. We didn't need a power structure anymore. We needed protection. We voted to make all meetings public, to require 2/3 community approval before any fines could be issued. We opened up the books. We published every fee, every payment, every vendor. It was messy, slow, imperfect, but it was real. And people started showing up. Elderly neighbors who hadn't attended anything in years, single moms, veterans, young couples with new babies, and somewhere between the folding chairs and the lemonade pitchers, the fear began to fade. But for me, there was still one conversation I hadn't had. Brenda's house was still standing, abandoned, shuttered, a ghost on the block. Rumor said she was living with her sister now, somewhere out near Yuma, out on bail, awaiting trial. I wasn't sure if I wanted to see her again, but fate, as always, had other plans. It happened on a Monday. I had just come back from picking up wood glue from the hardware store. I pulled into my driveway, my new driveway, And there she was, standing in front of her house. No clipboard, no hard hat. Just jeans and a hoodie and the unmistakable shape of someone who'd lost everything. Our eyes met. She didn't flinch. Didn't look away. Then, slowly, she walked toward me. I didn't move. She stopped 3 feet from me. "I never meant for it to go that far," she said. Her voice was thinner, like it had been stretched too tight and left to dry in the sun. "Didn't say anything. Because what do you say to someone who tried to ruin your life?" she continued. "I started trying to fix the neighborhood. Then I started trying to fix people, control them. You stood in my way. I crossed my arms. You didn't just cross a line, Brenda. You buried it." She looked down, and for the first time, I saw someone small, not powerless, just shrunk by the weight of their own damage. She pulled something from her pocket. An envelope. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I paid for the ramp. Quietly. Through a third party. Your lawyer can confirm." I didn't reach for the envelope. "Why now?" she shrugged. "Because guilt is a terrible roommate and jail might be quieter." I took the envelope. She turned to walk away. But before she reached the sidewalk, I said, "Why me?" She paused. Didn't turn back. "Because you were the one man I couldn't bend." And then she was gone. A month later, she took a plea deal. 2 years probation, restitution, banned from holding office in any neighborhood association for life. It wasn't the justice I dreamed of, but it was the kind this world gives. Sometimes closure doesn't come in the form of punishment. Sometimes it comes when the threat is simply gone. Fall came. Cooler mornings. Leaves changing just barely. Arizona doesn't do autumn the way I remember from my childhood, but it tries. And sometimes, even trying is enough. I rebuilt the porch swing, repainted the shutters, and every Saturday my father and I sat out front and watched the world keep turning. One evening he asked me, "You ever wonder what would have happened if we didn't come home that day?" I did. 100 times. If we came back Monday, or next week, would Brenda have finished the road? Would they have paved over the ramp? Would I have had proof? Would I have had anything? It haunted me, but I shook my head. Then I wouldn't have seen her in the hard hat. He smiled. And the trap? That was already being built. Because the trap was never just a locked gate or a concrete sign, it was truth, laid brick by brick, made of questions too big to ignore, made of courage too stubborn to die. And now? Now it stands. Every time someone in the community walks by and reads, the sign, "Private Property, Protected by the People Who Live Here," they know, not just who I am, but what we built, a neighborhood where one person doesn't get to be God, a ramp that doesn't get bulldozed for convenience, a man who fought not just to win, but to remind people they deserve peace without fear, and that's something even Brenda will never forget. The wind was loud that night, not fierce, not angry, just loud, like it was trying to speak. I sat alone on the porch while Dad rested inside, staring out at the lot where Brenda's fake road used to be. The gate stood firm, closed as ever, with that sign glowing under the solar floodlight. Private property, no through road. Violators will be billed, but no one violated it anymore. They didn't even try. And that silence? It wasn't peace. It was something more powerful. Respect. It had taken months, years really. But for the first time since Brenda's reign began, people felt like they could breathe again. Yards grew a little freer. Flags flew without fines. Front doors wore wreaths in spring and lights in winter, and no one was told to take them down. The new association held quarterly meetings now, not monthly, not weekly emergency power grabs, just calm, open sessions. I never ran for anything, never voted for myself, but they still looked to me like I was some kind of unofficial compass. One meeting, a teenager stood up, probably 17, shaggy hair, nervous hands. He asked, "How do we make sure this never happens again?" Everyone looked at me. I cleared my throat. "We don't need someone to keep everyone in line. We need everyone to speak up when someone steps out of it." He nodded, so did everyone else. And just like that, the rules changed. Not written in stone, written in people. Meanwhile, the lawsuit money came in, not much after legal fees and property repair, but just enough. I didn't spend it on a truck, didn't take a vacation, didn't expand the woodworking shop. I bought a stack of wood, and I started building benches, one for every corner of the neighborhood, one near the school bus stop, one in front of the dog park, one by the lake trail, every one of them engraved. For those who speak when it matters. Most. I didn't put my name on a single one, because the story was bigger than me now. But not everything had healed. Dad's health was fading. More doctor visits, more silence between his words. His hands trembled more than they used to. His eyes blinked, slower. But he still insisted on his porch seat. One evening, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded photo. It was me, about 20 years ago, standing in my first fire suit, grinning like an idiot, black soot on my cheek, helmet tilted too far back. "You remember what I told you that day?" he asked. I shook my head. "You said, 'I'll save people, even the ones who don't know they need saving.'" I blinked hard, trying to smile. "Sounds like something I'd say." "You did," he said. "And you just did it again." He passed a week later. Quietly, peacefully, in his sleep. I found him in his chair the next morning. Sunlight on his face. Hands still resting on the porch rail like he'd been watching the sunrise. The neighborhood came out in force for the service. People I didn't even know knew him. Old women with trembling hands, young dads with strollers, kids on bikes who said he always waved. They came, and they stood quietly. Not for me, for him, because they knew who he was and who he raised me to be. The day after the funeral, I found a package on my doorstep. No return address, just a note inside. "Your father built a man strong enough to save a neighborhood. He'd be proud." We are. Inside was a plaque, metal, brushed bronze, etched with care. Dalton Way. In honor of strength without violence and justice without apology. The city had renamed the road that ran next to my property, the one Brenda tried to steal, the one we'd reclaimed, and for the first time in a long time, I cried. Not the hard, angry tears I'd cried after the demolition, not the exhausted ones I'd cried after the settlement. These were soft, grateful, quiet. They fell onto the porch wood like rain, and I let them. Because dignity doesn't always look like resistance. Sometimes it looks like release. And sometimes it looks like a road that still carries your name long after the noise has faded. The years moved quickly after that. The benches stayed solid. The signs stayed bright. The gate still swung closed each night at dusk. And every time I watched it close, I felt something I hadn't felt since I bought this house. Not just protection, not just revenge. Closure. One day, a documentary team showed up, young woman, shaky camera. Not a big network. Some independent journalism outlet doing a series on HOA abuse. She asked if she could interview me. I almost said no. But then she asked one question that made me pause. "What do you want people to remember most about this story?" I thought about it a long time. Then I said, "Don't wait for someone else to speak up." She nodded, and her eyes misted. We recorded for 20 minutes. That video got 2 million views in a week. People from across the country messaged me. Not just with stories, with thanks. One man from Kansas wrote, "Because of your story, we stopped." A corrupt board member from evicting a 74-year-old woman. Another from New York. My mom's HOA threatened to remove her wheelchair ramp. I showed them your case. They backed off. And one from Florida. You don't know me, but I know your fight. I'm not afraid anymore. They didn't know me, but they knew what I'd done. And that was enough, because I wasn't a firefighter anymore, but I'd still helped people out of a burning building. It was a letter that brought it all back. Not a legal notice, not a threat, just a folded envelope with careful handwriting that said, "To the man who made us brave." Inside was a photo, a cul-de-sac, somewhere far from Willowbrook. Kids drawing, chalk hearts on a driveway. No security patrols, no measuring tapes, no fear. On the back, someone had written, "You gave us the blueprint. We just followed it." I stared at that photo for a long time, long enough for the coffee in my hand to go cold, because that was it, wasn't it? This wasn't just about my driveway. It never was. It was about everywhere else, about every block where silence still lingered like fog, every street where power hid behind rules, every ramp threatened by pettiness. I hadn't just built a ramp. Back then, I'd built a path, and now others were walking it. That truth hit me harder than any fine, any citation, any victory. Because some victories don't come with applause. They come with echoes, and echoes last longer than noise. Willowbrook had changed by then. No more forced uniform lawns. No aesthetic inspections. The voluntary association was still going strong. We had a fund for accessibility now, 2 ramps installed in the past year, fully covered. The new HOA president, Karen West, was a school teacher. Soft voice. No clipboard. Her first act was to write a formal letter to the city thanking them for their support during the Brenda investigation. Her second act, she came to my porch. She stood there nervous, holding a plate of cookies like it was still 1995. "I know this is strange," she said, "but I want to ask something." I leaned against the porch rail. "Go ahead." "We want to name the new community pavilion after your dad." That hit me square in the chest. I looked away for a second. The porch, the gate, the quiet street. It all blurred. "Why him?" I finally asked. "Because he was the first one we all saw roll down a ramp without fear." I nodded slowly. "Then call it what it is." She tilted her head. "Freedom Pavilion." She smiled. "That's perfect." A few weeks later, I stood there at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. They asked me to say something, just a few words. I didn't prepare anything, I didn't need to. "I used to think justice came with noise," I said. "Now I know it sounds a lot more like laughter, like birds in the morning, like chalk on driveways, and music from open windows." I paused. "And that's what Dad fought for. That's what we fought for. Not revenge, not power. Just the right to be left alone in peace." They clapped, not loud, but long. That night I walked the neighborhood like I used to before all of it. Not to patrol, not to monitor, just to breathe. Old friends waved. New ones joined me. Even the teenager who once asked how we keep it from happening again, now a college kid on summer break, walked beside me for a while. "Still think about it?" he asked. "Every day," I said. "But not the fight, the silence before it." He nodded like he understood more now. "Do you regret it?" I stopped, looked at him. "No," I said, "but I regret waiting so long to act. Because that's the truth people never tell you. Justice isn't loud, it's heavy. And carrying it alone for too long breaks something inside you. That's why I keep telling people now. Don't wait. Don't wait for the fines to stack up. Don't wait until your porch is rubble. Don't wait until your silence is the weapon they use to cut you down. Speak. Even if your voice shakes, especially when it shakes, that's when it matters most. I still keep the gate, still keep the sign, still keep the voice memo of Brenda's confession, not because I need it anymore, but because some memories need anchors, and every so often, I see her name in the news. Community consultant, HOA reform speaker. It makes me feel strange, angry, maybe, Hopeful? I'm not sure. People change, or they pretend to. But I don't carry hate anymore. I carry a bench, a sign, a gate, and the voice of my father in my mind saying, "You don't have to be loud to be brave." Sometimes I think about how it all started. A driveway, a letter, a woman with too much power and too little heart. But now all that power is gone, and in its place, wooden benches, kids with chalk. A man on a porch, no longer watching for the storm, but watching what grows after it, because storms pass. But seeds stay buried deep, waiting for the quiet. And when that quiet finally comes, you'll hear the sound of something stronger than rules, stronger than fear, stronger than any HOA. You'll hear the sound of freedom growing. The knock came at 6:02 a.m. Not hard, not panicked, just sharp, precise, like someone who didn't want to wake the whole house. Just me. I opened the door and found a man in a button-up shirt and pressed slacks, holding a clipboard too clean to trust. He smiled. That practiced kind of smile you only learn in training sessions with titles like De-escalation for community professionals. "Mr. Dalton," he said, "I'm here on behalf of Larkridge Development Partners. We're evaluating a zoning proposal for the empty lots surrounding Willowbrook." My heart sank. Not because of what he said, but because I'd seen this story before, just with different actors. Larkridge wasn't local. They were a mega firm known for swallowing small communities whole, then repackaging them as exclusive modern eco-villages with high fences, higher dues, and even higher walls of bureaucracy. "What kind of proposal?" I asked flatly. He gestured to the clipboard. "Mixed use, townhomes, co-working spaces, potential gate installation at both ends of Dalton Way for traffic moderation. Oh, and an optional community board to help with maintenance and enforcement." My porch went quiet. Too quiet. Because this wasn't just déjà vu, this was a sequel, and I wasn't about to let anyone build a new empire on the ashes of the old one. That night, I walked the whole neighborhood, every lot, every open patch of grass, every view that could soon become concrete, noise, and rules. I took photos, not of the land, but of the people. Old couples tending flower beds, kids chasing each other barefoot, a woman doing yoga in her front yard, not a care in the world, and I asked myself the same question Brenda once asked, but for a different reason. How far am I willing to go this time? The answer came quickly. All the way. The next community meeting was packed, more than ever before, every chair filled. People stood in doorways, some sat on the floor. I didn't need a microphone. I stood at the front and held up the flyer Larkridge had sent out, glossy paper, bold fonts, promises of renewal and refinement. Then I flipped it over, blank. "See this?" I said. "That's how much space they gave for your voice." Murmurs filled the room. I continued. "They don't care what this neighborhood fought through. They just see a quiet corner ready to be flipped." A man in the back raised his hand. "Can they do this legally?" "Not without rezoning approval," I said. "Which means not without us." People looked at each other, nervous, hopeful. Then one voice spoke, a soft one. Carla, the single mom who once handed me the secret documents during the Brenda scandal. "We fought before," she said. "And we won. Let's do it again." The next 2 weeks became war. Peaceful, lawful, strategic, but war. We launched a petition, not online, paper, door-to-door, face-to-face, over 300 signatures in a neighborhood of 400. We reached out to the city council, reminded them of the last scandal, sent them the Channel 5 reports, the HOA dissolution letters, the court settlement records. We documented everything. Old habits die hard. Larkridge pushed harder. More meetings. Smoother brochures. But no matter how many buzzwords they tossed in, sustainable, inclusive, efficient, the truth was clear. They wanted to install a new HOA, and we weren't having it. Then they made their mistake. They offered buyouts, quiet ones. 4 families got letters with confidential offers. One of them was a veteran named Keith. Keith brought his letter straight to me. Brenda tried to take our peace with a hammer, he said. These guys want to do it with a check. He looked at the letter, then tore it in half. They don't get my street. The city zoning board held the final hearing. Packed room. Larkridge showed up in suits. We showed up in jeans and folded arms. I stood and spoke last, not with fire, not with rage, just quiet truth. I was a firefighter for 20 years, I said, and you know what made me stay sane in all that chaos? The room leaned in, knowing that when I came home, no one could steal my front porch. No one could knock down my ramp. No one could tell me what peace should look like. I paused, then looked right at the council. You let this go through? You're telling every small neighborhood in this city that survival means nothing, that dignity has a price tag, and that silence comes cheaper than history. No applause, just silence. Then, slowly, the board nodded, proposal denied. We didn't celebrate with fireworks. We didn't toast champagne. We just kept living, and that was the real victory. I watched the Larkridge trucks leave one by one, watched the signs come down, watched the clipboard. Man glanced once at the gate on Dalton Way before vanishing for good. And I sat on my porch that night, just me and the breeze, and whispered something I didn't even realize I'd been holding in. Thank you to Dad, to Carla, to Greg, wherever he was, to every soul who had stood up when it was easier to sit. We'd beaten them again, not with fists, but with memory. And if they ever came back, they'd find the gate still standing, the benches still holding, strong, and a man still sitting on his porch, waiting, not scared, not bitter, just ready. Because some neighborhoods build fences to keep people out. We built ours to remind the world who we are, and that's a warning they won't forget. The gate creaked a little now, not broken, just aged, weathered by dust storms, summer rains, and the passing of time. I oiled it once a month, not out of fear of failure, but out of respect, because it wasn't just metal anymore. It was memory, and memory, when preserved right, becomes something more powerful than concrete or laws. It becomes a warning, a promise, and a testament. I sat on the porch as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across Dalton Way. Somewhere, a wind chime clinked, lazily. The wood from my latest bench project cooled behind me. I hadn't sold a piece in weeks, not because there wasn't demand, but because the work felt different now. Each plank held a story. Each cut reminded me of the boards I had rebuilt after. The ramp was destroyed. That ramp, still sturdy, still smooth, still sacred. I kept it clean, not because my father used it anymore, but because his spirit still did. Sometimes I'd catch myself talking to him in the evenings. You see that hawk? I'd say. Or, they planted new roses down by Carla's place. Or just, we held the line, Dad. And I always felt deep down like he heard it. One morning, a letter arrived from out of state. Return address, Tucson. Inside was a small, handwritten note and a photo. It was Brenda, smiling, not smug, not powerful, just human. She was standing in front of a modest one-story house, a community garden in the background. Her note was short. I teach now. Conflict resolution. Volunteer. Work, mostly. I never thanked you for the lesson. I fought for control. You fought for peace. You won. I needed to lose. I'm sorry. BKI set the letter down slowly, stared at the photo. She looked older, not in years, in understanding, and strangely, I felt no heat in my chest, no bile in my throat, just silence. And maybe forgiveness, not because she earned it, but because I didn't need the weight anymore. Later that week, I was walking by the community bulletin board near the dog park when I noticed something new. A printed flyer with a photo of one of the benches I'd built beneath it in bold text. If you sit on this bench, know it came from fire and was carved into peace. No name, just that. And it hit me harder than I expected, because someone out there remembered, someone understood. I wasn't the only keeper of this story anymore. Seasons shifted. Kids who used to ride scooters now drove cars. The teenager who once asked how we'd stop it from happening again. He was now organizing community cleanups and studying civil law. He told me he planned to go into public policy. I want to make sure neighborhoods like this one can breathe, he said. I nodded. Then remember one thing. What's that? That. The worst thing power fears is ordinary people who remember how to fight with dignity. On the 5th anniversary of the ramp's destruction, we held a block gathering. Not a memorial, not a protest, just a meal. Everyone brought something. Keith grilled burgers. Carla brought sweet tea. The new families brought their kids, who ran laughing through the lawn where Brenda's road was supposed to cut through. We didn't give speeches, didn't hang banners, but around dusk, someone turned to me and asked, "If you could go back, would you change anything?" I looked around, at the full plates, at the free voices, at the ramp, at the gate, at the sign, at the sky, and I said, no. Because all of this came from that. I still wake early most mornings, still pour 1 cup of coffee, still sit on that porch swing, the one I repaired, the one that stayed, and sometimes I see it all again. The flash of the bulldozer, the crush of concrete, the silence in my father's face, the smell of sawdust and strategy, the rise of resistance, the signatures, the courtroom, the boardroom, the gate, the girl with the documentary camera, the letters, the benches, the way the wind always seemed to know when something was about to change. And now, it's quiet. But not the kind of quiet that comes after fear. The kind that comes after the storm, when the leaves shake gently, when the porch groans like it's thinking, when the ramp glows golden in the morning light, untouched, undisturbed. That's the sound of a neighborhood that remembers, that won't forget, and that never again will bow to a clipboard. Because sometimes justice looks like a courtroom, sometimes it looks like a protest, but sometimes it looks like a man on a porch, watching the sun rise, knowing he never let them take the soul of his street, and that's the kind of peace no HOA will ever understand. But every viewer of this story will, because now, the gate stands for all of us, and beyond it is something they can never pave over: freedom.